And hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you happen to be right now. I am here in California, where it is 1 o'clock in the morning. I am in the midst of sleeping dogs and sleeping cats. I am also in front of a different background, which I'll explain in a moment. But first, I wanted to say I'm Tad. If you hadn't figured that out already, I will be here for approximately the next hour reading from Sleeping Late on Judgment Day, a book written by my very favoritist writer, me. I am only my favoritist writer because I am the only writer who keeps me alive right now. Which is not to say I do it all by myself. Of course I do not. My lovely and talented wife, who is currently in England, is a key part of the process as well. And although she is probably not up yet, because I think she went to a party last night, somebody else in her family may be. So they are not only entitled, they are assigned to give my love to her. I am also actually sitting in front of one of Deb's blankets. Unfortunately, I don't know how well you can see the color of it. Not really super well. But I think it's absolutely gorgeous. It's one of my very favorites of hers. And the reason why, now I can explain, is because since I am spending hours every day sitting at my desk or sitting at a desk working on the copy edit of the Splintered Sun, the manuscript, and going through the notes from my publisher, Betsy Walheim, and my our very fine copy editor, Mary Lou Capes Platt. And because I'm doing that for hours every day, instead of being downstairs when there is no Deb upstairs to keep the dogs company, because she's usually working on her fabric art up here, I have moved everything up here, upstairs. So I just took Deb's table that she keeps everything on. If you could see the rest of the table, you'd see. But anyway, and now the dogs are up wondering why I am talking in the middle of the night. So perhaps they will make a brief appearance at some point, but they're here with me wondering what the hell is going on. Anyway, so we are surviving despite the absence of the household matriarch. Dogs are puzzled about it all. Lemon in particular, who's very attached to Deborah, is much upset and is basically sleeping every night sort of folded over me, on me, squinched up against me, burrowed into my armpit, you name it. She is definitely the one who's noticing that Deb's gone, and considering the only other experience she had of this was when I went out of town, and I am not her favorite, although she's rather fond of me. But the only experience she had was when I went out of town. This is the first time Deb has gone somewhere, and Lemon is quite bereft. Johnny is a little more, he's old, he's been through it. He's seen us go on many trips, both singularly and as a couple, so he's used to it. He's just in his normal, cope mode. But Lemon is quite puzzled and worried about the whole thing. So anyway, that is the dogs update. Other than that, they're fine. I mean, I'm taking care of them. I'm feeding them. I'm doing all the things. I'm giving them extra attention because Deb's not here. And as I said, I've even moved my workspace up here upstairs so that I will at least be around and they will know they're not alone in the house. I spend so much time worrying about dogs and cats. And what else is there to tell? Yeah, just I'm working on the copy edited manuscript of Splintered Sun. I think it's looking good so far. I still have some more work to do on it, and we'll be probably working on it through the first week of April. And then I think I have to ship it off to my publishers, but I don't think I'll have any problem getting that done. And yeah, just doing the stuff that has to be done. There's more stuff to be done with Deb not here, obviously. Got to do extra dog care and water the flowers and, things like that. But not complaining. Missing my wife, of course, but not complaining because I'm not much fun right at the moment anyway, since all I'm really doing is working on a manuscript. So, yeah, I think that's about it. It's as I said, it's a lot of weirdness for the dogs. It's not so much for me, except I'm sitting in front of a different background. But other than that, everything is pretty much what you'd expect. So, with no further ado, let alone ado about nothing, which most of my ado is, actually, now that I think about it. Shakespeare could have been writing that about me. So without too much more babble, let me just go quickly check and see who has showed up and checked in. And I see Stephen Watson. Hello, Stephen. Good to see you. I see Petra. A pleasure, as always, to have you with me. Suzanne Owen, very much the same. Mr. Jeremy Ehrman, as always, good to see you. Isaac, thank you. I saw you just finished the Navigator's Children, and I thank you for the kind words on that. Andre, nice to have you with us, too. Wouter, always. Maria Jose, a pleasure. Christina is also here, and good to see you. Rosalba, Mr. Mark Craigbaum, star of Stage, Screen, and Poetry Slams. Chris Fab, Christian Fabricius, my friend and helper, who has done so much kind stuff for us. Christy Sanders, always a regular, always welcome. Nicole, same thing, good to have you. Checking in from, I believe, Berlin. Mark Redman, usually checking in from Yorkshire. Penny Davies, the same. Lovely to see you all. And if I've missed anybody, I'll try to remember to check back in before things end. In the interim, I will be reading because we're getting near the end of the book now. And there's going to be lots of things happening as poor Bobby deals with all the things that he's had to deal with, including basically being inches away from being sent to hell by a heavenly juror of E4-8s, his E4s, and being released only by offering to sell out Sam and the folks at Kynos, which we heard about last week. And Sam fell off the wagon, which we heard about also. And I think that's pretty much what's going on at this point. Sam fell off the wagon, has gotten back on again, had a bit of a freak out. He and Bobby have made it up. And yeah, I think that's where we are. So, and anyway, Bobby is now looking to move on with another part of trying to deal with this really wretched hand that he has been dealt. So that's where we are, and that's where I'm going to start reading, unless I think of something else that I want to report to you guys. No, can't think of anything. It's been, I basically have not left the house since Deb went off in the airport went off to the airport in an Uber, leaving me, here with the dogs. Not that I couldn't have, it's just that when I did have our daughter here to help with the burden of dog support, I neglected to go out and do anything. I think I went out once to pick up Lemon from her daycare where she gets to play with other dogs because Johnny is old and grumpy and doesn't give a damn. But other than that, I don't think I've been out of the house since Deb left. So it's not an unusual situation for me, but I am beginning to feel a little cabin fevery. Maybe that's one of the reasons I decided to move upstairs, was just for a change of things. Actually, it's mostly just because I want to have the dogs here. I can keep an eye on them, so if there's any grumpiness or competition over who's got what and who's on what bed and who's got food and who has treats and all that kind of thing. I kind of like being in the middle of it. What can I say? I'm a dad. I'm a dad that now is like a huge part of my personhood. This is what happens when you have kids. Although my kids are now adults, but any other parent with adult kids knows, like Ms. Petra, for instance, knows that doesn't change just because your kids grow up and start to lead their own lives. You're a parent forever. Anyway, enough of these middle-of-the-road homilies. Let me get back to the book and see what might be going on in it. I think the last time we left it at a chapter head. So yeah, so now we are starting a new chapter Chapter 41, Straight On Till Morning. By the time I got, and that's another part I forgot to mention, is that Bobby has apparently made some kind of deal with Eligor, his archest of arch enemies. So that's also something that happened, although we didn't actually hear the bargain, because as the writer, I didn't want to give it away. So there you go. Chapter 41, Straight On Till Morning. By the time I got out of 5-Page Mill, a wet afternoon had become a wet early evening. I didn't have much left to do now. Unless Oksana had squeezed out of the boarding ramp and made a run for it, she was on her way back to the land of Scythian warriors. I'd had my last knees up at the compasses, and I'd spent pretty much all my money. I'd even put a final check in the mail to George, a bonus, with a note telling him to use it to hire himself a part-time back-scratcher, because I was pretty sure it must be itchy living in a pigsty. And I couldn't take anything where I was going either, so I gathered up all my stuff and stowed it in one of Kaz's closets, then gave the apartment a cleaning, just in case she came back one day. The Amazons, bless them, had left candy bar wrappers and potato chip bags in some very unexpected places, along with chocolatey fingerprints on several of the expensive draperies, so it took a while before I was satisfied. I don't like tidying up much, but once I start, I can't stop until everything is damn well clean. I also sent a letter to Clarence, care of Chico at the bar, thanking him and Wendell for the risks they'd taken on my behalf. I didn't want to tip the kid off too early. I took a last look around Kaz's windowless Arabian Nights apartment. It was so full of memories now that it was harder to leave than anywhere else I'd ever been. I don't get too attached to places usually, at least not the places I sleep in, but Kaz and I had fallen in love here. And for a few crazy days during the last weeks with the Amazons and Harrison, Clarence Jr. around, it had begun to feel like a home. I'd never really had one of those, at least not during my afterlife. As to what my earlier non-angel life had been like, well, if I hadn't been for so sure I had no future, I would have spent some of it finding out who I used to be. The visions I'd experienced under Anaita's influence in the museum had seemed more than simply real. They had seemed profound, even crucial in some larger way. I couldn't ignore the possibility that she'd manufactured them somehow, but in my gut they felt genuine. Normally I'd have been fired up to learn more, but I had simply run out of time. Judgment Day was here, and I had pretty much reconciled myself to exiting this afterlife with unanswered questions. As I took a last turn in the courtyard garden, I heard something fluttering. A moment later, a tiny, crooked shadow dropped to the ground in front of me, extended its 4 wings, then folded them back up. I kneeled beside it. It was a new Nizik, smaller than the last, kind of a cross between a bald hamster and a dragonfly. What it said was quiet, and the message was short. By the time I picked out a few words, it had finished. I had to hold the creepy little thing close to my ear to hear properly when it started again. The voice was Kaz's, but weaker and more distant than before, as if she broadcast from a distant galaxy. This Nizik can't be reset. This will be the last message, Bobby. I can't stand it. It's too hard waiting to hear from you. These little sips of foolish hope only delay the inevitable. I'm sorry, my love. It's my fault. If anyone should have known better, it's me. I left the miserable little thing in the courtyard, locked up the apartment carefully, then climbed into my ugly yellow chariot. I discovered something interesting about the cab while running my errands, another odd-shaped piece in the small puzzle that had been my relationship with Temuel. See, Heaven was definitely trying to keep an eye on me, and they had to know about the taxi, but they didn't seem to be able to keep a direct trace on it. I knew this because in the few days since my trial, I'd already managed to lose several tail cars. Also, Heaven's spies didn't seem to know where the apartment was either. I'd clocked several suspicious vehicles in the general vicinity of Kaz's place, but they seemed to be unable to narrow down my whereabouts past a good-sized sanctuary. Heaven's Finest didn't even seem sure which side of the freeway the place was on. How could that be? I had to admit that it seemed like it might have something to do with Temuel getting me to come all the way across town before he handed me over to Counterstrike. Heaven may not have known exactly where I started my trip, but they latched onto me within a few minutes after I left the apartment. I was on the Bay Shore, a mile or so south of the University Avenue exit, when I spotted the tail car, a nondescript Ford minivan. Actually, it was almost too nondescript, without bumper stickers or even dealer plate frames. Female driver and male passenger were also wearing sunglasses, although it was now after 6 at night and the sky was getting dark. I was almost insulted until I decided they were just the obvious tail, the ones who I was meant to concentrate on and maybe even lose, while the real tail followed me at a distance. I took a circuitous route, pretending to try to lose the minivan, but I didn't really want to lose them, so I didn't give it my best shot. I took them on a long, irritating ride through the south end of town. I don't know if you can hear that in the background. Lemon is playing very aggressively with a heavy plastic toy, trying to let me know that I'm being weird. I took them on a long, irritating ride through the south end of town, up San Antonio Expressway and through a dozen cross streets, then down Shoreline towards Stone Fruit Mall. It was interesting to see how much more modern the buildings were at this end of the city. The center of San Judas was moving, or at least the economic center, leaving the dear old downtown behind. Out here, Silicon Valley's current wave of well-to-do immigrants were building a big toddler town for themselves, full of zippy restaurants and coffee shops with sidewalk tables and awnings and office buildings with the fancy brushed metal look of expensive bathroom fittings. How did I get to be such an old man when I've only been alive 20 years or so? I must have been a real curmudgeon in my previous existence, but you probably already guessed that. I pulled into the new parking structure at the Stone Fruit Mall. If you ask an old local, they'd be happy to tell you that much of this part of San Judas, and the rest of the Lower Peninsula too, was once the world's fruit basket. I'm not sure I'd want that nickname myself, but I guess large rural areas can't be choosy. Anyway, the massive 4-story shopping center was built on the site of what had been one of the biggest apricot orchards in the state, which only survive now in the name. The blossoming branches on the mall logo and probably expensive dried fruit packages in the mall's many gift shops. Now came the tricky bit. I parked in one of the outermost stalls on the second level, left my phone in the taxi because, let's face it, we all know it had to have been bugged as hell after the trial, along with my car keys, stashing both under the seat, then made my way into the mall's vast front atrium. You could look up several stories once you got inside, and the storefronts were nearly all glass, a huge, faceted jewel of commerce. People wandered through the place like they were in Oz, some even bobbing their heads to the piped-in music. Never listen to mall music. It will put you in an apocalyptic mood. But maybe the mood was only mine. The customers seemed happy. Modern shopping malls are like a small and somewhat brainless world of their own. A guy I know who used to work in the Stone Fruit said that in the summertime, lots of parents just dropped their kids off in the morning with money for food and a movie at the theater, then came back and got them at closing time. I figured that however many people were tailing me, some would stay outside to keep an eye on the cab while others followed me in. That meant I had to make my move quickly before the inside tail found me. So I grabbed an elevator and shot up to the 3rd floor, in and out of the gap, then immediately shuttled back down to the second floor boutiques, up to the 4th, then down to the food court and across the mezzanine to the elevator on the opposite side, which I took down to the underground parking lot, where I was greeted in the elevator lobby with a large "Coming Soon, Target" sign. Dodging up and down that way was how I'd used the lifters in hell to confuse the demons hunting me, and it had worked pretty well. I was pleased to see it seemed to work on angels, too. I didn't go near my own vehicle, of course. The elevators ferried shoppers back and forth to the main building, but at the far end of the garage was a set of stairs that led up to a bus stop and taxi stand next to the parking garage. I climbed the stairs, walked as fast as I could to the main doors, and then hailed the first passing taxi. Yes, that was my plan in miniature. Leave one cab behind, get another. Everything else was just hand-waving for distraction. It was a lot simpler than trying to lose my surveillance on some breakneck movie-influenced car chase. In fact, the best plans are usually always simple. Why don't I remember that more often? The driver let me out about a quarter of a mile from the Shoreline Park footbridge. After I paid him, I had about $20 left, so I gave it to him for a tip. In return, he warned me not to hang around too long after dark because, he said, some real weirdos were out in the Baylands at night. He clearly didn't know he was talking to one of them. As he drove off, I pulled up my collar against the stiff bay breeze and started walking. I thought I'd handled it all very neatly, so I was embarrassed as well as disturbed to see a solitary figure standing beside the beginning of the footbridge across the bay. The only thing I hadn't got rid of was my gun, so I kept my hand on it as I got closer. The guy didn't look like he was going to move, so I slowed to check him out. "Come on, hurry up, would you?" he shouted at me. "It's freezing out here." "Clarence, what are you doing here?" The kid was wearing a long overcoat. Playing James Bond in his imagination was my guess, and looked every inch the mysterious contact in a dangerous foreign spot. Oh, Lemon. I don't know if any of you can see this dog here. Hello, Lemon. Yes. You want to say hello to the people at home? Yeah. Hello. Hello. Yes. I know. It's okay. I'm just talking. It's all right, sweetie. Yeah, I know. Yeah. The door's open if you need to go outside. Go on. Yeah, you're a good girl. Go on. Okay. Go on. Let Daddy do his work here. I had a feeling she might make an appearance at some point. And looked every inch the mysterious contact in a dangerous foreign spot. "Waiting for you, obviously, and you seem to have forgotten my name again." Lemon, honey, please don't press my buttons here. "Yeah, sue me. Why are you here? You couldn't have got my message yet." "What message?" Shit. I stood in front of him for a few seconds, staring. I hate surprises. "It's been a long month, kid. Why are you here?" "Because I'm going with you." I don't feel good about this, but I confess that my first thought was to smack him unconscious again like I had last time we'd been out at Shoreline, because I just didn't need this shit. I knew it was wrong, though, and I also had a suspicion I might not get away with it as easily as I had on the first occasion. The kid had been running and working out, things I should have been doing myself if I hadn't been so busy trying not to get killed by demons and Nazis, and he was looking pretty fit. "No, seriously, why are you here?" "Look, Bobby, don't treat me like an idiot, whether you think I am or not." He was flushed, and I didn't think it was just windburn. "You've been on your farewell tour for days. Anybody with any sense could see that. You slow danced with Monica Neighbor right in the middle of the compasses a couple nights ago. You got drunk and sang Carrick Fergus, for goodness sake, and you're not even Irish." "I might have been." "Yeah, but now you're just a self-important jerk. A jerk who's planning to sneak off and do something stupidly heroic or heroically stupid, probably get charred black like Cajun food, and leave the rest of us in the dark." I was mildly impressed by the Cajun cooking reference. The kid was working up better material. "And what if I am? I don't think I'm under any moral obligation to get you and Wendell killed too." "I agree. Wendell doesn't need to be involved any more deeply, so I didn't tell him. But I'm a different story, Bobby. Now, are you going to pistol whip me again, or are we going to see Sam? It finally caught up with me. But how did you know I was coming here? He smiled, clearly pleased. A lucky but educated guess. When Sam told me what really happened here that night with the Galu, he also told me about the portal, or whatever it's called. He never mentioned another one until you found Anaida's in the museum, and I thought it was pretty unlikely you were going back there again. Anyway, I was coming over to your place to talk to you about what we should do next when I saw you leave. So I followed. You were being tailed by a white van. I know. And I figured you knew, and you ditched them somewhere, and probably ditched me too without realizing. I took a chance that you were on your way out of town already, and that meant here. He grinned. And I was right. Yeah, congratulations. You win an all-expenses-paid trip to see Revenge of the Bitch Goddess. I slumped a little. So I'm going to have to knock you out to get rid of you, is that right? Hey, it could have been worse. I might have brought G-Man. He produced his phone. I could still call him. I considered it for a moment. You win, I said at last, but I would be damned if I was going to thank him. We turned into the wind and walked out onto the footbridge, the long wooden causeway that led across the bay to the abandoned park. The railing was only about waist high. The wind got colder as we neared the middle. I couldn't help remembering a night on this same walkway with a giant, molten hot thing running after me, and Sam, determined to disconnect my important bits from my other important bits. I tried to cheer up by reminding myself, and Clarence, when he asked what I was moping about, that I hadn't really believed I would make it through that one either. So maybe there's a greater purpose after all, kid. Maybe there's a reason all this shit keeps happening to me. There's nothing sadder, said Clarence, than an angel getting religion. Wow, kid, that sounded just like something Sam would say. Thank you. We stepped off the bridge and onto the rising ground of the man-made island. The south side of Shoreline Park, which had once been a picnic and hiking spot, and was the original purpose of the landfill island, had gone completely feral in the nearly 20 years since the place had closed. It looked like the Jersey Pines, like the kind of place the Cosa Nostra would dump inconvenient corpses. We cut across the island toward Happy Land, the old amusement park, a collapsing museum of the grotesque that has been involved in more low-budget movies than Roger Corman, usually as the background of some kind of post-apocalyptic zombie mutant alien freakout. You could almost hear the screams of overacting extras in the wind. Crazy Town, the funhouse, was on the far side, looking out over the bay and the ferry lanes. It was amazing to think that just a short time ago, even by California standards, the old Ferris wheel had painted colored circles of light against the sky every night, and the place had been full of visitors and music and the excited shrieks of the roller coaster riders. All over now, baby blue. The funhouse stank, like you'd expect with a place that had only been visited in later years by crackheads and the last stage homeless. We stepped under the pitted aluminum roof, and for a moment I considered hiding my gun there somewhere, since I was pretty sure it wasn't going with me when I journeyed to Kainos, but decided against it just in case something nasty jumped out at me from somewhere at the last second. Third mirror from the left, I said to myself, then finished the joke I'd made to Sam the first time, and straight on till morning. What's that? From Peter Pan, more or less. The road to Neverland. That's how Sam taught me to know which mirror. Now what do we do? Clarence was looking at the place a bit nervously. It's one thing to brave almost certain death to help a friend. Another thing to wade through the broken syringes, shattered bottles, and human excrement at the very beginning of the trip. Sam gave me instructions. I picked up a piece of glass, then spit on the tail of my shirt and started to clean it. "What are you doing?" The kid's eyes were big. "I need some blood." "Don't worry, I'll use my own." "And you're going to do it with that filthy thing?" He was horrified. As I thought about it, I realized it wasn't too smart, really, not if by some odd chance I ever wound up back in this body again. "Here, use this." Clarence fumbled in his pocket and brought out a little bottle of hand sanitizer gel. "Use a lot. I can get some more." "Not where we're going." But I cleaned the sliver of glass and was secretly grateful that the kid was there. Now that I thought about it, I really should have brought a razor blade or a pocket knife or something clean. Which did not in any way detract from the neat magnificence of my mall taxicab switcheroo, of course. When I was finished scrubbing, I picked a part of my hand that wouldn't inhibit me too badly, the ball of my left thumb just below my palm, and made a small slice. Incision doesn't feel like the right word when you're using a shard of a Southern Comfort bottle as a scalpel. When the first drops of red appeared along the cut, I put some on my fingertip and wrote Deloriel on the third mirror from the left, which was a mirror in name only because the metal surface was so pitted it looked like Freddy Krueger's backside. Nothing happened. After we'd waited a few moments, I had a sudden idea. "It's a mirror," I said. "It doesn't look like it now, but it's a mirror." So maybe I need to write backward. I dabbed my finger in my blood again, which was beginning to puddle in my palm, and wrote Leirolod. Still nothing. "Well, this sucks," I commented. "What did Sam say? I mean, exactly." "He said write my name on the mirror in blood." Clarence gave me a look that I swear was full of pity. I rethought the don't hit junior decision for a moment. "What? Does Sam ever call you Delorio?" I looked at him hard for a couple of seconds, just to let him know I could have figured it out without his help, then went to the bloody inkwell one more time and scrawled Bobby on the pitted metal. The place was beginning to look like Jack the Ripper's washroom, but this time we only had a moment to wait before a glowing line appeared in the air in front of the mirror, a zipper or something similar, but foggier and less distinct. I'd seen one like it before. "Step through," I said. "You first, fearless leader," said Clarence, and so I did. Hang on just a second. "Yes, John. Leave the door alone, please, okay? It's all right. Go lie down. You're all right." And so I did, and stepped out again into a cold winter forest. But this wasn't anything like what I'd seen the first time I'd come through, when we escaped the museum. When you hear the word forest, you usually think of trees, but the only tree-like thing about the scorched pillars standing all around us were their half-exposed roots in the black, ruined ground. The devastation extended as far as I could see along the hillside where we stood. Devastation, corruption, destruction. From where I stood, I could not see a single living thing. "Anaita's already been here," I said. "This isn't good. It's not good at all." "Damn it, Bobby, I hate when you say things like that." Clarence turned in slow circles, staring at the ruined forest like a child who has just realized he's alone in a supermarket and his parents have disappeared. He took a step, and little puffs of ash rose into the air around his shoes. The sky seemed bleached almost white. We were surrounded by silence. "Because you're usually right." "Okay, John? Yes, you're doing fine now. Can you lie down, sweetie? Can you lie down? Maybe go on your bed or something? One of your beds? One of your many, many dog beds?" Okay. Excuse the interruptions. Chapter 42, Wrath. It was a place I'd barely even seen, a place whose connection to my own life was mostly negative and Yet as we made our way across the devastated landscape of Kainos, I was on the verge of tears. Oddly enough, part of my reaction came because the destruction was limited. I could still see the unsullied mountains and the pristine sky. Looking at those, I had the same sense of wonder, of connection to something deeper and more real than reality itself, something that had struck me so hard on my first brief visit just a couple of days earlier. It made the destruction seem even more pointless. But what upset me the most was that it wasn't simply devastation, all the scorched trees and gouged earth, but fury. The destruction was vengeful, and it was personal. This was no act of nature, despite the rifts in the land 20 feet wide and unguessably deep, or the burned trunks of huge trees scattered in all directions as if by a hurricane. This was the work of a very, very angry, very powerful being. An enraged goddess, I felt sure, an avenging angel who had thrown off the restraints of heaven. Almost swimming in deep black and gray ash, we finally crested the nearest hill and could look down on a valley at the outer edge of the devastation. It was sickening to see the wreckage of the forest on this large a scale, but that wasn't what first caught my eye. On the far side of the field of char that had once been a rolling meadow, bisected by a river that was now only a blasted, empty ditch, stood the house I had seen twice from afar, once in person with Sam and once through the door in the funhouse, the first time Sam had opened it in my presence. It sat like an unwieldy spacecraft on the top of a hill that could have been the scorched, blast-cracked launch pad of some abandoned ruin of the Soviet space program. But the house itself was completely untouched. Clarence and I stood staring, surprised into silence. It seemed like a mirage that might shimmer and disappear if we made any noise. As I stood there staring at something that shouldn't exist, or at least not looking like it did, like a nice house in the hills in a real estate ad, I realized for the first time that something else was going on. Clarence looked just like Clarence. Now, normally, when you're standing next to a person who looks like that person, it's no big deal. But when you get to heaven, you always look like an angel. And, as I discovered, when you wind up in hell, you look like something that belongs in hell. So why was Clarence standing beside me wearing his button-collar shirt and his windbreaker that looked like he ironed it, and his suede shoes that always looked like they belonged on the feet of a rich old European man? I accused him once of wearing hush puppies, and he was really insulted. "These are Ferragamos," he said, I guess the same way I might say, "It's got a 426 Hemi engine." I looked down at myself and saw I was also wearing basically the same thing I'd worn during the trip through Shoreline Park, except now with a layer of ash and dust. My jacket, a black t-shirt, a pair of dark jeans, and the work boots I like because A, they're black, B, they're not half bad to look at, and C, you can kick the shit out of someone with them if you have to. I tell you not to compare my wardrobe to the kids, but because finding myself wearing exactly the same clothes in an entirely different reality was hard to figure. Remembering my gun, I checked my pocket, but it wasn't there. So, same clothes, but no other objects. "Are you wearing a belt?" I asked the kid. "Yes." "And you were wearing it before we got here?" He gave me a puzzled look. "Yeah? Why?" "We'll talk about it later. Meanwhile, we have to figure out what to do." And I have. We're going to go check out the house. Now his expression changed from puzzlement to seriously contemplating mutiny. "No way. You're joking, right? Because if that's the only place around here that doesn't look like a bomb dropped on it, then the person who did this is probably inside." "I don't think so." "Oh, then let's go, sure." "I don't think so is all the assurance I need to risk whatever we're risking here." "What are we risking here?" by the way? Just our bodies or our souls too? I laughed, but it wasn't because I found anything very funny just now. Let's put it this way. If there were such a thing as soul insurance, I'd be calling my agent. Clarence looked pale. No, he looked pale green. There's a difference. And we're going there, why? Because it's there. Because it didn't get blown to shit in matchsticks. And because we're trying to find Sam, and it's the most obvious place he'd leave a message, or at least a clue where he is. But it's so exposed. And so are we, standing in the middle of all this nothing. Let's get to getting. It would have been an odd house, even if it stood in the middle of a nice neighborhood instead of the remains of downtown Hiroshima. It was too tall, for one thing, 4 or 5 vertical stories in a box only about half as wide as it should have been. From this angle, the tower at the top was much more visible and looked less like a cupola and more like a steeple. It set me to thinking, but I kept my thoughts to myself because Clarence was like a spooking horse, all nerves and eye whites. Of course, that was really the only sane reaction to trying to sneak up on an angel, a genuine warrior queen of heaven, with nothing but our bare hands. Hell, my own mouth was so dry that if Anaita had appeared in front of me, I couldn't even have spit at her. Up close, the ring of devastation looked slightly less complete. I could make out the remains of a couple of paths and the ruins of more than a few outbuildings, although ruins was a stretch because what we really saw were only the scorched outlines and ordered ash where buildings had once been before the firestorm. A ghost of a grassy verge still fringed the place like the hair of a dying monk, but the grass had turned gray, and when I reached down to pick some, it crumbled to dust in my hands. "Shit," said Clarence in a whisper. "She just burned and burned and burned." I almost warned him to keep quiet, but of course if Anaita was in there and listening, she'd probably heard us long before that. It made me wonder again how much power she had used here and how she managed it. That's one difference between the higher angels and the schmuck angels like me and Clarence. We were limited by the physical fact of our bodies, the bodies that heaven gave us. People are limited that way too. It's called being mortal. But the important angels, as well as big-time demons like Elgor, could channel a much larger amount of power than I could ever hope to. It still wasn't unlimited, though, and that reminded me of the line from Gustavus that I'd modified. Follow the power. Not like now, when we were walking across its effects, but in terms of figuring out how the whole mess worked. Clearly, Anaita was very strong here. As powerful as she'd been on Earth, probably more so. When we'd met on Earth, she hadn't been able to do anything like this. Excuse me. I've been petting Johnny for the last 5 or 10 minutes to keep him calm at my weird fact of sitting here reading something and talking out loud. And I think I've got a lot of dog dander into the air. We'll see if I make it through. We were limited by the physical fact of our bodies. Oh, sorry, no, further ahead. But the important angels, as well as big-time demons like Elgor. No, already read that too. Follow the power. Not like now, where we were walking across its effects, but in terms of figuring out how the whole mess worked. Clearly, Anaita was very strong here, as powerful as she'd been on Earth, probably more so. When we'd met on Earth, she hadn't been able to do anything like this, or she would have just grabbed me for my brainwashing, then evaporated everyone who followed me into the museum. Not to mention that she wouldn't have been anywhere near as occupied by the closet full of bugbears I dumped on her. But here, maybe second only to heaven, she could call on the energies of something like a Force 5 hurricane. That was bad news for us, of course, although it made me feel better about not having a gun. Because it would have been as useless as a cock ring for a Ken doll, I mean. But if the battle plan I had begun percolating back on Earth was to have any chance of succeeding, we definitely could not afford to get into a shooting war with the Angel of Moisture. a pretty good joke now that I thought about it, since I was wading through gray dust and black ash as dry as cornstarch. We had to outsmart this superior being, somehow. Clarence hung back a little as we got near the house, but I had already decided that if Anaita was around, she'd know we were here, so I decided on the direct course. I walked up the steps, leaving little Ashy out. I knew that was going to happen. Johnny, sweetie, honey. I'm really trying to do this here, and I need your help, and your help would be for you to go do something else. Is that okay? Can we go on with things? Do we have the light back more or less normal? Kind of, sort of, yeah, okay. Johnny, sweetie, you really need to stop doing that, okay? Where was I? Okay. Clarence hung back a little as we got near the house, but I had already decided that if Anaita was around, she'd know we were here, so I decided on the direct course. I walked up the steps, leaving little ashy outlines of my shoes on the otherwise unblemished wood. The house wasn't painted, but it didn't look like it ever had been, and the ruination all around didn't seem to have touched it. The wood was the color of Philippine mahogany, healthy and solid with no sign of damage. It gave me a mental picture straight out of The Wizard of Oz, with Anaita as Wicked Witch, standing on the roof and spraying death all around. "Bobby?" Clarence said nervously, but I ignored him. I mean, I know people say I charge into things without thinking, but what difference was that going to make here? Should I have stood on the porch in the middle of that lunar landscape and called, "Yoo-hoo! Anyone home?" I pushed the door open and found myself in the middle of what was clearly the main room, a large, high-ceilinged hall with several doors leading off it, like something that had once been a barn but had been converted into a family room for a very large family. The furniture was beyond rustic, rough and tied together with cords, not nailed, no paint or stain on anything. One wall was mostly taken up by a huge medieval fireplace. At the opposite end of the room stood a closed cabinet, simple but unlike the handmade objects everywhere else. In fact, it looked a bit like something that in the old days used to hide a television set, although I doubted they got cable here or even satellite. There were also lots of tables and rough benches, but no sign of any people. To continue the children's stories theme, it looked like the three bears had built a casino in the middle of the forest and then gone out for one of their long walks before opening it. "I don't think anyone's here," I called back to Clarence. My voice echoed. A furious, fiery angel made of broken shards of glass and pottery did not appear. I walked over to the big square cabinet and pulled open its hinged doors. Light leaped out, startling me, but it was not the bright beams of a psychotic angel about to burn me to charcoal, but the cool, misty light of heaven, or at least as much of it as we ever saw outside of the real place upstairs. What was inside the out-of-place cabinet was a cube of solid, shifting light, something I'd seen before. We had one in the advocate's office downtown, where it was kept under lock, key, and the grumpy, watchful eyes of Alice, the dispatcher. The cube looked like it was made from a single piece of crystal, but it was a lot more powerful than even the wildest New Age imagination could grasp. It was used to communicate directly with heaven. Sam called that going to Mecca. I've never been the reverent type myself, so I only used the one downtown when I absolutely had to. The problem with this particular cube was that it was almost certainly linked not to heaven, but to Anaita, and only to Anaita. I immediately shut the cabinet doors and moved away from it. Continuing the investigation, I poked my head briefly into a large side room that appeared to be a kitchen, except the only appliance was a huge beehive clay oven built into one wall. The ash in front of it was undisturbed. Whatever had destroyed the outside hadn't even shaken the floor in here. I headed upstairs to the next level. The stairs, like the walls and roof, were very, very solid. I was beginning to think the house had been brought here, or created here, as a whole, and then the cruder furniture had been added by Sam's third-way souls as part of their new life. But where were all those soul family Robinsons? And where was Sam? A nasty thought kept whispering that if I went outside and looked carefully, I might find ash outlines of more than just buildings, maybe even of something Sam-shaped. But I kept pushing that thought away. The upstairs floor seemed to be mostly bedrooms, although that word is stretching it a bit. They were a lot more like the barracks at Camp Zion, with wall-to-wall bunk beds made in the same Tom Sawyer Island style as the rest of the furniture. These at least gave some sign of being slept in, the thin wool and, again, very handmade blankets tossed in disarray. It had clearly been something less expected than a military reveille that had got this group moving. I was inspecting the dorms on the next floor up, trying to get a rough idea of how many people had lived here, when I heard Clarence call me from down below. He sounded a bit uptight, but why shouldn't he be? Be there in a second. No, I think you should come now. Oh shit, was my first thought. He's found a body. I reached into my pocket out of habit, but there was no gun to be drawn. Usually I hate carrying them because then I keep having to use them, but I hate it even more when I need one and I don't have one. My gun control dilemma in a nutshell. Bobby? Coming, Junior. I clomped down the stairs, making lots of noise so he'd hear me and unclench. Just take a deep breath and hold your... I didn't finish the sentence, because as soon as I saw Clarence standing in the middle of the dining hall, I also saw the guy who was aiming a drawn bow at him, a very wicked-looking arrow balanced on the string, pointing right at the kid's guts. Well, I said in my calmest voice, what have we here? The man with the bow turned to look at me. He was whipcord thin, with a narrow face somewhere between 20 and 30 years old and smeared with ash. He also had a healing scar on his forehead that went through one eyebrow, like the San Andreas Fault, giving him an expression of mild surprise, but his eyes were cold and hard, and his mouth was set in a thin line that said, "Don't push me because I'd love to put an arrow into this guy's chitlins." The weird thing, though, is that he looked somehow familiar. "Who are you?" he demanded. It's always a bit hinky when you change astral planes since everything sounds like what you're used to speaking, but I was pretty sure he was speaking actual modern English, despite being dressed like one of those guys in Last of the Mohicans, pseudo-Native American gear of leather and fur and ragged cloth. Okay, I didn't actually read the book, but I watched the hell out of that movie. "Oh, we're not the ones who burned this place up, if that's what you're asking." The line of his mouth stayed as taut as his bowstring. "It's not. I saw what happened here. Who are you?" I wasn't quite sure if somebody who'd watched Anaita trash the area was going to be thrilled with more angels, and I didn't know what the rules here were as far as me and the kid dying painfully with arrows sticking through us. Would we come back? Not that I could afford to trust resurrection these days anyway. "Bobby. My name is Bobby, and this is..." "Harrison," said Clarence, and despite being on the verge of kebabhood, the kid shot me an evil look. "My name is Harrison Eli. We're not your enemies." "Be interested to know why you think that's true," said the man. There was still something about his face that struck a chord, at least what I could see of it under the ashy pseudo-camouflage. "But I think I'd better leave the questions up to the rest." He moved the drawn bow off Clarence long enough to gesture toward the door. If I'd been close enough, I might have tackled him then, but I wasn't, so I didn't. "Go on," he said. "You first, and make it quick. I'm not staying here any longer than I need to." I won't bore you with a description of our entire journey, except to say that as we left the house and its charred perimeter behind, the scenery became increasingly impressive. No, that's a stupid Weasley word. It wasn't impressive, it was stunning, gorgeous, transcendent even, as affecting as the first time I'd seen it. As we made our way out of the grassy foothills and up into the lower reaches of the mountains, I again had the strangest sensation of being under the influence of psychedelics. I don't know if you've ever taken them, but the isness of everything becomes almost heartbreaking. Water is so unbearably transparent and yet full of color and moves so strangely. Light is more refracted. Textures are astounding, and details you would otherwise overlook, like the pattern of bark on a tree, become as intricately fascinating as the most engrossing piece of art. And everything, simply everything, seems almost to glow from within, as if it has been constructed just for you to see at that moment and admire in its peak of perfection. Kainos, once we got away from the sight of Anaita's apparent hissy fit, was a lot like that. Not because we were on drugs, and not because it was somehow supernatural, but because it was sort of ultimately natural, like a landscape created to remind people that we were part of nature, and nature was part of us. Each tree seemed to bask in a certainty of its place in the universe. The soil was pungent with the smells that soil can give you, and they were all, even the slightly foul ones, just glorious. Even the rocks seemed to have a presence, like fascinating people. But I think it was the sky that really did me in. It was just a sky, blue, high, and full of streaky clouds, but for nearly the first time in my life, it felt like something that was truly the crown of creation, the milky sapphire that surrounded us and in which we were all fortunate to live. "It's a beautiful place," I said at last, because I felt like if I didn't say something, the feelings would make my chest explode. "It is," the stranger replied, and for a moment the watchful look on his face eased. "When I first came here, I'd just walk and walk for hours, lie on my back and watch the clouds, like being a kid again." And then I recognized him. It was something in the light as he looked up that brought back a photograph I'd seen in his house, one that had been taken when he was about the age he appeared to be now, hiking up a mountain somewhere, looking young, healthy, and full of purpose. Completely unlike what he'd looked like when I'd first seen him in the flesh, in fact. He had been pink then, very pink, and very, very dead. "Edward Walker," I said. "You're Edward Lyons Walker." He turned so quickly I didn't even have a chance to step back. The arrow on the tight-drawn string was only about 3 inches from my left eye. "How do you know me?" I considered telling him how his death and the disappearance of his soul had started me on a journey through a world of craziness, had nearly got me killed, or worse, a couple of dozen times, and eventually led me even into hell itself, but I decided it could wait until I had a better idea of how things stood here. "I knew you when you were alive," I said, which wasn't exactly true, but I had spent a lot of time studying the living Ed Walker, so it wasn't a complete lie either. He wasn't content with that, but I drew the line and politely refused to say more until we got to wherever we were going. He threatened me a little, but I could see his heart wasn't really in it. He might have shot me if I'd tried to disarm him, or maybe even if I'd tried to run, but he was at heart a scientist and a humanist, and couldn't quite work up the anger to skewer me in cold blood. At last, and none too graciously, he told me to get going again. The journey lasted through the dying afternoon, and I had the pleasure of watching the sun setting in a world I'd never visited before, except I felt pretty sure I had. "This is Earth, isn't it?" I said. "Bobby!" Clarence thought I was going to try to trick Walker, and he clearly didn't feel as confident about the man's unwillingness to murder as I did. "Yeah, it is," Walker said. "Seems to be, anyway. An Earth without people. No farms, no cities, no dikes or canals or roads, not even Native Americans stringing salmon nets across the river." "Yeah," I said. "Place looks a lot happier without us, doesn't it?" "I guess so," Walker said. "Now, a little less chatter, or someone's going to hear an unfamiliar voice and put some arrows in you and maybe hit me by accident. I hate those kinds of accidents." And that's where we're going to stop, because it is now a minute after 2. So let me just put that away. The dogs finally got quiet near the end. Don't know if you heard Lemon vigorously playing with a very hard, I think it was maybe like a deer antler. She's got an antler that she chews on occasionally, which is hard as a rock. And when she drops it on the wooden floor, you can hear it all the way around the house. Anyway, let me just double check and see if everybody is still with me. Yes, they do seem to be. All right, good. So with that, and yes. All right, so with that, I am going to wrap it up for the night. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for putting up with the occasional distractions as the dogs made their not so much displeasure as confusion and concern evident. I think you got a chance to see at least Lemon's snout there for a moment. Johnny is an older dog now, so he didn't jump up to stick his head in my face like he used to when he was younger, but Lemon is still quite head-face stickable in terms of her age and health. Anyway, so with that, I am going to wrap it up. I thank you all very much, as always, for joining me. It's a huge pleasure to spend time with you. I am hoping that you will all take very good care of yourselves, because that's the first and most important thing. And then you can help take care of your friends and loved ones. Keep an eye out for those who might be in need of a kind word, friendly gesture, a listening ear, maybe just a couple of bucks. I will return at 7 p.m. and we will continue with Bobby and Clarence and Ed Walker in Kainos. And we will find out what Anaita's deal is and how badly she is planning to mess up our heroes. So until 7 p.m. when I will return, or until next week, or whenever you happen to join me next, again, I thank you. Be well. I'll see you real soon. Peace and arrivederci bambini.